So, welcome again. Here we go. I'm Jamie, and here's Rachel Kaplan join us. So we met through the work of Anna Halprin, who really brought the somatic expressive exploration out into the natural environment. The first month of our training program was spent at Sea Ranch, so each day we went to the ocean, to the beach, to the forest to explore movement and the creative process. And I would say that was really the origins of my experience with ecosomatics and how do we connect our bodies to the larger body of the planet and begin to diminish what is kind of considered a rigid boundary between self and other. How can we expand ourselves to include the earth body and also begin to take responsibility for our presence on the earth? So, Rachel, over the years, has been doing so many interesting things, and our focus today is on her work with urban homesteading, what that means, and also how that blends into ecosomatic action. And so I'm finding, there's a lot of richness already kind of bubbling up. And so I just want to say, welcome, Rachel. And
Thanks, Jamie. It's good to be here. Do you want to ask me a question or you just want me to back at you?
but you paw back. We start that dance together. And so just essentially kind of a little bit of your origin story in the sense of what's, steered you towards this particular focus of urban homesteading and ecosomatic action. Yeah.
That's a big question, but I would start by saying I've always been the kind of person who um, has very porous boundaries with the world, and so feel a lot around what our culture is doing to the earth. And I've been in somatics since I was a teenager, and so have been learning how to drop my awareness down and through along the central channel, heaven to earth and wide. And um, I came to urban homesteading because I became a mother in 2001, a few weeks before 9/11 happened. And it got pretty clear in that moment that there was going to be more and more precarity. Things started really speeding up in the beginning of the 21st century, and I was living on a small piece of land out in Point Reyes with my family, and it seemed like growing food and making friends with the deer that were going to eat it unless I tended to it
Right.
properly, and all the relations that we were able to have in our family life and on this little piece of land. And in response to the political social shifts that were happening. And then I studied permaculture with Penny Livingston and her then partner James Stark out in Bolinas. And I did a year-long permaculture course. And permaculture is it's a philosophical and practical study of how humans can live, mostly us white Western humans who've been talked out of our relationship with the living earth, how we can live more in relationship with all of our relations, the water, the air, the plants, other people. And so permaculture is really impactful for me. It really made a huge difference. It's run on three beautiful ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share.
Mm.
So we just keep tending and retending and trying to regenerate some of the broken relations that we live amidst. And I think all of us here know that like one of the yeah, the primary like wounding of modernity is separation. So it's a weaving back practice. And because it's food and land based, it's a somatic practice. We're working the land, we're digging, we're moving water in. Like I tend to move water in buckets and into barrels and then into the earth. And so it's a deepening spiritual practice also to like have yeah, body-based practices that produce connections, resource, and a kind of wealth that is easily shared and spread to your neighbors, to your friends, all that.
Hmm.
So that's somehow I got there.
I didn't know that 9/11 was the kind of the wake up call for that journey, and so I'm curious. Since 9/11, we've had various kind of shocks to the system,
Yeah.
and of course, climate chaos becoming more and more present. And so I'm curious how these different kind of shocks to the system, where that's taken you now, or yeah,
Yeah.
how's
I
that
would
been
just
for
I
you?
would just like say really it was being a mother that
Mother.
was the
Okay.
key. Because it's
Hmm.
like as you see things getting more precarious, and my primary job is like making sure this creature, being, child
Hmm.
has food and sufficiency.
Right.
So just to name that,
Uh-huh. Thank
that
you.
becoming a mom was really crucial in a way. And yeah, there's more and more escalating shocks to the system. We're certainly in the midst of a huge upheaval, revolutionary moment. Um, yeah, I would say that really in the beginning, my focus was on creating a little permaculture paradise where I lived and then helping other people in the town where I live, which is in Petaluma, California, in Sonoma County, really learn how to grow and tend and share and work together. As time went on, it seemed to me that the biggest problem we have in some ways is our human relationships, how difficult it is for us to get along, for
Mm.
us to come to collaborative ways of being, for us to bridge the differences between us. And so it seemed after a point when you can really see if you have a little backyard that you're trying to true up and grow things and um, share things that like no one family, unless you have a lot of land and are not living in a city, could ever have anything approaching sufficiency. And even there, we're all hooked into the grid.
Sure.
And the grid is part of our death cult. And it's like we're all in it, no matter how much we want to be out of it. And so it started feeling to me that as the crises started escalating, that really the work is how do we tend to our relationships, our human relationships. And when I wrote the book Urban Homesteading, I got a lot of people from around the country um, bought it, and I had lots of conversations with people in all parts of the political spectrum, which isn't that usual for me because I live in a siloed kind of way by design.
Don't we all? Yeah.
Well,
To a
yeah,
certain
some
degree,
more
right?
than others for
Yeah.
sure. And I definitely heard from like left-wing folks and right-wing folks, and pretty much across the board, everyone wanted the same thing. They wanted good food and clean water and clean air and to be able to pray the way they wanted to and a future for their children. But there was this big gap sometimes between what I think of as the left wing and more the right wing. And the left wing was like, let's grow food and share it with our neighbors. And then on the right, they were saying, let's grow food to save money to buy more ammo. And I was like,
Hmm.
whoa,
Hmm.
there it is. Like, how do we? And it's not like a universal, like there's people on the left who also feel that way.
Sure.
But it was like a moment of like, whoa, there's so much we have in common as living bodies. And then there's these political ideologies that have hoisted us or we've been raised in or we've so I still think that like the better way now is not just like do it yourself, but like
Hmm.
do it together. How do we create um, networks of mutual aid? How do we help each other? How do we bridge the gaps of ideology between us when we all share basically the same body, need the same things to survive and thrive? Like how could we use this as a bridge
Hmm.
um, that crosses some of those divides? So I'm more interested in that human element. The skills of urban homesteading, which are food growing and water catching and saving and directing and energy conservation and all the things that I'm sure I don't know. Do I need to? Shall I?
Sure, would just to maybe, well, I know, for example, that you write about how you live in a kind of a drought area, whereas where
Right.
I'm living, there's abundant rain here in the
Right.
hills of Massachusetts. And so
Right.
different ecosystems shape us differently. We respond to them differently. And
Sure.
of course, we have to adapt, as with anything, to personalize and make it ours. So just in your experience of your environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely in California, water is an issue. There isn't a sufficient amount of water, and it comes all at once
Right.
in the year and not throughout the year. So one of the strategies that is evolving is about catching as much water as you can and then using it over time. So, and permaculture, which is again the basis for how I practice, was evolved by two men who lived in Australia, where there's also water precarity
Hmm. Hmm.
and fires now and drought. And so that's one of the essential pieces here in California is to like, how do we catch the water? How do we sink it? How do we spread it in the landscape? How do we hold enough of it so that we can keep growing food throughout the year? Yeah, where you live, it's different.
Hmm.
Although it's not true that it's always too wet. Like there's definitely been periods of drought in
Sure.
Western Massachusetts and Southern Vermont in the last year. So partly what we're all facing is that the climate changes are escalating, the precarity is escalating, and the unpredictability. Like we don't actually know how we're gonna evolve regionally. Like we have these new atmospheric rivers. I want my own personal one over me at all times. Like it's like a lot of water.
Right.
So like that's a big change. Like we have had sufficient water to fill the reservoirs in California for the last 3 or 4 years because of this new atmospheric impact. So I think I wonder, I think sometimes like the way to have practices that are earth-based and connect us up to where we live and what's true is that it is a practice of presence. What's true
Hmm.
now? What's
Hmm.
happening? This because things are changing in ways we can't predict and faster, as we know, than scientists predicted. And um, if the Trump regime continues to do what it's doing, like the precarity and the climate impact is going to get more extreme.
Right.
It just is. And
And
so some of it's practicing
right.
presence in place.
And along those lines, I think what you're really bringing forward is the importance in what we teach in terms of improvisation, responsiveness, that we are able to adjust accordingly. So, for example, where I'm living now, we have a very short growing season. And all of a sudden, it's like all hands on board right now to get things in the ground. It's raining. I've been transplanting. But there's something about that attention to the land that really changes how I perceive myself and the environment and the sacred nature of what we're doing when
Mhm.
we are so connected with land, with water, with food, really the origins of life. I mean, there's something that has significantly changed my consciousness since moving from California and vast space and ocean into this land of trees and water and creeks and so place shapes us, changes us, and
Mhm.
at the same time, our impact is also changing place. And
Mhm. Yeah.
so, those of you who may not know, there's a scientist named Alpha Lowe, and he's done a lot of work with working with waterways and kind of rebuilding wetlands as a way to sink more carbon into the earth. And so they were talking about after the recent LA fires how there could be a way that water could be captured and more trees could be grown. And so a kind of a working with the environment to mitigate kind of the damage of encroaching civilization. So
Mhm.
there are solutions happening, but I think it really starts with like you were talking about, beginning with yourself, extending the circle to include others. So, what would you say, for example, like a good way to start? How would you like get started?
Yeah. Well, one way to start is to really observe your conditions. Where are you? What are the limits and opportunities, say, of the place where you live or of your neighborhood or of your watershed, to really take time to perceive it and then to, I would say, follow what delights you or inspires you, or where do you want to learn? There's so much to learn in just the growing of food, like from seed to seed, like all the different steps. And that's a beautiful practice and a beautiful metaphor also for growth and flowering and fruiting and dying back and coming again. Um, yeah. And if
Mm-hmm.
you live in a small place and you don't have a lot of space and you want to just practice growing, like get a barrel and start putting seeds in it and see what happens, or look around your neighborhood and see what's growing and see what's beautiful and what's inspiring for you. I think beauty is really a function that we want to um, connect to,
Yeah.
like what we love, what we find beautiful, what opens our heart.
And for me, you touched on something really important, which is taking that time, right? Getting off of Facebook a half hour a day to tend to your plants or whatever it is, the allocation of our personal resources and our attention to really supporting life, supporting, as you said, beauty, but also bringing, I know for myself, bringing me back into the rhythms of life and just noticing that. I know, for example, this winter, I felt very fallow. There was a lot of snow on the ground, and I felt like I don't have the oomph. And I thought, well, it's winter. Let go. Give over to winter, the settling, and trust that spring will come.
Mhm.
A different energetic force, a different way that my bodily ecosystem is operating. So, yeah, it's how to begin with just like the simple act of growing, whether it's pollinators or vegetables or flowers, and supporting beauty in life. And
Mhm.
then next.
Well, again, like what are your opportunities? What are the limits and opportunities of where you are? How much actual energy do you have for what tasks? Um, again, there is no sufficiency. There's no self-sufficiency. So we let go of that idea.
Hmm.
We can then feel into like, what am I available for? What do I want to learn? Where do I feel like I'm practicing? Um, Giving more than I'm taking, because that's one of our human problems is we take and we don't give back.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be as simple as like tuning our attention and sitting outside every day and listening, like what birds do I hear and what sounds do I hear and how does the wind feel on my skin? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but some people are motivated towards the plants. Some people are motivated towards building projects or soil making or earthworms or mushrooms or trees. I mean, there's so much proliferation in the natural world that we could bring to our urban places, as well as enjoying them when we go away from home.
Right, right,
So I think that there's no one answer. It's really personal. Like, what are you good for? What do you take a stand for? Where do you feel the most um, connected?
right. Yeah, I think it's important that idea of what's calling you. What, in a sense, because it can be easy in kind of confronting climate chaos, environmental damage. Oh, I have to sacrifice. I have to do something, instead of what brings me alive and how can my aliveness contribute to stewardship, to restoration. One of the people I put in the chat, Basil Camus, is somebody who grew up with his father in kind of a tree business, landscaping business, and realized at a certain point that they were doing it all wrong. And so he decided to change his business to really educating people about their trees and preserving old trees instead of cutting them down, and began this project of really going after native trees for local areas and having people gather seeds and begin to create saplings, giving them away for free. And so this project that he talks about is, he said, I grew up in a very deeply conservative Christian community. And people would just basically say, well, it's okay, God's in control. There's nothing, you have to do, the environment will take care of itself. And to a certain degree, I'd say, in a lot of urban culture, well, technology will solve this for us, or, scientists will solve this. And so I'd say in both cases, there's that deferring of responsibility and participation. And I think what you're asking is, how can you be involved? What is exciting to you, and how does it begin with what we know in somatic practice makes a lot of sense of listening, witnessing, attending to the present moment of our interior and the exterior. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, what are some of the practices that have supported you in all of this?
Land-based practices or inner practices?
Either and.
Either and.
Yes.
So many, so many. So I'm just looking out at my garden right now, which is green and beautiful. And I think because I've gotten skilled up in growing things and I have a ease with it now, I just naturally go out there every day. And this time of year I talk to the plants and I see who's sprouted up since last night and where there needs to be water, and there's always something to do. So I track that, but I also over the years have I do less because my body hurts more.
Mm.
I have stuff with my knees and my joints, and so I have to be kind to myself also. And I do want to name like this idea that like we have to take responsibility like as individuals for the climate crisis is a PR campaign started by like BP and ExxonMobil and has captured our minds, but it's actually like the biggest environmental impacts are of course um, industrialized corporate capitalism. And so sometimes I think the best practices are to get revolutionary and to push back
Mm.
against the way the world is organized and to work with different organizations that are committed to the serious kind of change that we need. And we're in a moment now in this country, at least, where that is a Herculean effort that I think is another practice that like again little bit every day, and how do we show up and what is an action that is actually has any leverage or any impact. And so I just bring that part up to like to just like presence, like all of this happens in a bigger field than just our own individual
Sure.
actions, which are super important,
Right.
made more powerful and amplified when we do them in community and in circles of practice. So that's another thing that I've tried to build where I live is working with other people. Like I want to be in the garden with other people. I want to be on the streets with other people. I want to be practicing somatics with other people, all of that. Like that's one way I think to yeah, amplify our impact.
Certainly. Yeah, and
And
I certainly don't want to, when I talk about the kind of the individual actions, for me it's both and. It's
yeah,
like, well,
me
what
too. Me too.
self and community, and that this is a multi-pronged approach to how we live in ourselves, in our place, in community, in the larger world. And sometimes it's exhausting to keep up with it all. I mean,
It is,
especially
and
when
I
you
would
know.
it is, and I would just want to confound the conversation just even further
Good,
to
okay.
say sometimes, agriculture feels like a domination of the earth. It's like
Hmm.
it's not about we're like interrupting wildness, or
Right.
we're trying to make the earth do something for us. It's part of the extractive thing that we
Hmm.
do. And this every year on the land where I live, there's a lot of oak trees. And this time of year, there's literally thousands of oak starts. Thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to let them grow, I would soon be living in an oak thicket, and I could not actually park my car, much less grow anything. So this year, I probably pulled 1,500 little oak babies out.
Wow.
Every time I do that, I'm like, ooh. And I kind of apologize to them and I say, I'm sorry, you belong here more than I do. I know that. And you would live here longer and give back more, but I can't live here if you're all here. So I'm in that kind of conversation with the earth as well, where it's like, I don't think I actually know my place deeply because
Mm-hmm.
I am still deconstructing, dismantling, composting what I was given as a growing person and what's all around me. And so, Joanna Macy, she talks about like holding actions being one thing we can do, building new systems, and also consciousness change. Like those are the things that humans can really do in the time of the great turning. So I feel like that piece of like talking to the oaks like that and trying to get myself in actual right relation to the earth is a complicated dance. Like
Hmm.
life wants to live, I want to live. But
Right.
sometimes I'm like, maybe it's best if we just hospice ourselves into the ground as humans. Like I'm not certain, you know?
Right. Right.
So it's like, I don't know. That's a lot right there.
Well, it's great questions to hold in terms of our place on the planet and do we make room in terms of sharing the planet, not just with other humans, and we can become very human centric in a lot of our conversations, but there are all these other beings that share the planet with us, and how do we coexist or how do we compete? I mean, Basil Camus, who I was mentioning, has talked about he does cluster plantings, and he says it's just like a forest, and everything's kind of moving towards the light and taking the nutrients. And he says some things dominate, other things don't, and he's just said that's just the way of nature. So how do we
Mhm.
balance all of that out? The domestication of land, as
Mhm.
well as also remembering the place of the wild and why
Mhm.
that's important.
Mhm. And
So,
in a way, how that's what we lose in a um, ecocidal culture is our own wildness
mhm,
and knowing how to, and that is what we gain in somatics, I think, by returning to like all the proliferation of life within, right?
right.
But outside, it's not what we see, and it's not what we are doing when we're farming. We're not generally farming in wildness. So
Right.
there are some forms in permaculture. There's something called a food forest, which is
Mhm,
similar to what Basel may be doing. It's just like there's different levels in a forest. There's like the herb level and the vining level and the shrub level and the tree level and the canopy tree level, and they all find their own way of coexisting or competing for sunlight and
mhm,
water. And there's something called a food forest where we plant different plants around trees that will fill those different niches. And that's something that really works way better in your climate than
mhm.
in the California climate because like the California forest is very sparse. It's
Right.
like oak trees and really very little grows under the oak or very little grows under the redwoods. They're sort of almost monocultural compared to the amazing proliferation of the Northeast or
Mhm.
places that just have more water.
Right. We're actually starting a food forest on our community land here right now.
Awesome.
So there's a woman in the community who's like really gung ho about it. So that was actually a lot of this morning's work. So it's interesting you
Wonderful.
name that.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned before, from your website, your blog, an article you had written about this idea that I think is really important in this conversation, which is the difference between sustainability and regenerative work. And sustainability, preserving what is, and regenerative work, healing and improving. And I just thought that's a really important concept both for our bodies in
Yeah.
terms of the personal healing and regeneration of our own life force and improving, optimizing how we are as bodies participating in life. And so, just your thoughts about that
Yeah.
paradigm.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that forward. I do think that sustainability in general is, yeah, what are we sustaining at this point? And we don't want to sustain the status quo and regenerate. Yeah, I agree with you. Like the regenerative framework is helpful. What does it take internally for us to heal our traumatic impacts or our ancestral lineages or daily life impacts that make it hard for us to be liberated in our life force energy. And the same with the work we do with the earth and our relationship to the earth. Like we want to, I want to heal the harms. Like I want to be part of that rather than just sort of like, okay, we're going to hold tight here. And yeah, that happened, but we're not going to really hack the system. And so it asks to be a systems thinker in a different way and to really see the bigger network of both harm and resilience and opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we learn to, like, we know different ways of how to do that in our systems, like what resilience feels like, or how to work with our nervous systems, or how to tend to some of the traumatic impacts that all of us sustain. And same with the earth, we can learn like just like compost is a great example, right?
Sure.
Like
Mm-hmm.
compost to heal damaged soil, and what do we add to the soil, and how do we plant in a way that actually builds up the soil if the soil really is the place where all things grow from with the addition of water and sun. Like we want to heal the soil,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a regenerative project for sure. And it goes even further. It's like in California, it even goes to like we want to bring beavers back into the
Right.
waterways so that they can catch water and spread it and create more life force energy. So there's like bigger places where we can work
Mm-hmm.
also with the land that actually connects us to the indigenous creatures of a place.
I love it that you brought up the beavers. I've recently discovered a resident beaver in the creek across the road from me, and so I've had lovely encounters just witnessing and being with. And I feel very privileged to live in the wild like this and to
Right.
remember these original forces that as human beings we've been around for our whole lives. Modernity is a very short period of time in the evolution of our own species, and that this is uncommon, right? And yet so essential to realizing, oh, I share this land with this beaver, right? And the beaver is doing its thing, and I'm taking in not only the presence of beaver, but what I would just say is its attention, its movement, everything that is speaking to me through the presence of beaver, and on and on and on with all the other creatures around here, bobcat, and so how do you take this sense of the wild into urban environments? I mean, you live in Petaluma, which is kind of a cross between urban country, right? But
Yeah.
so I'm just curious how you do that.
Well, I've had an awakening of wild in my body in the last years. A lot more energy flows through me than used to. That is wild Kundalini or something like something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So been very exciting. It's very arousing in a lot of ways. It's a big life force energy that I'm able to access in a different way. So I pretty much take that wherever I go.
Mhm.
So I show up in cities with this wildness, and people literally come up to me and they're like, "What are you doing over there? What's happening over there?" So I don't really have the answer to it, except it's through my movement practices
Mhm.
that I have been able to contact that energy. And um,
Hmm.
I mean, and I have encounters with wildness, not on the homestead so much. Although, occasionally you're standing there and a hummingbird flies by, or there's a snake in the path, whatever. There's coyotes on the hill up above where I live, and fox, and they'll talk sometimes at really interesting moments, or so there is a little bit, but I experienced the wild piece more here
Mhm.
and through the practices of dropping in and connecting with other living bodies, sounding, moving,
Mhm.
joining, praying with our bodies.
And I love how you really brought that forward, that wildness is something we can become when we liberate the life force in us. And of course, so much of it, as I've noticed over the years, is just the self acceptance of my own wildness, of my own reverberation of energy that is not so much constrained, but that can easily move in different directions, just like water, like rock, like sky. And
Mm,
it's like that ripple effect,
mhm,
that bringing who we are into the world with our movement vitality, our somatic vitality, begins to impact our environments. And
mm.
so this back and forth conversation, with our interior, with our exterior, with land, with inspiration, and with just, the craziness of our own being is is a kind of a pre-verbal, non-verbal way that we impact those around us. And so I appreciate your wildness. I
I
get it.
see it different. I see it coming in a different way than you. It's interesting. Like to
Uh-huh.
me, more it's like the wildness is all around me. Like it's just the life force is everywhere.
Sure.
One of my other teachers, Richard Heckler, he would say, just open your hands like this
Mm-hmm.
and signal to the universe, I'm here, and the energy is just going to drop into your hands. And I'm like, it's really true.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more about becoming porous and like dispersing myself
Right.
into the bigger than it being so much about my wildness. I feel
Oh,
wildness in
yeah.
me. Anyway, I don't know if we're saying anything different,
I
just
think we're saying the same. It's the
it's
wildness.
all connected, right? It's
I
all
like to
connected.
sometimes say, I study the body to forget the body. I
Huh.
enter through the portal of the body to
Huh.
forget it and just become part of the
Yes.
larger environment. So,
You go. Same,
yeah,
same.
same,
Totally.
same. Whether it's coming from the ground or above or laterally or,
Yeah.
it's moving
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, it is.
So I think wildness is a great segue into opening up the boundaries of our conversation to include other people who are on the call.
Great. Yeah.
So, anything you want to say before we make that transition, or just
No, I just appreciate the conversation and the opportunity, and curious what people are getting or thinking or wondering about. Happy to see my friend Carol Swan there. Woohoo!
let me see if I can open up the. Let's see, how do we do this into grid pattern? Gallery, there we go. Okay. So, feel free if you want to jump in just to unmute yourself and speak up. Any responses, and it could just be responses, or it can be a particular question, or just whatever moves you. Interpretive dance is welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I was posing as Jamie there with your photo on my.
Oh,
I still have that from election times. Um, I'm so glad to be here with you both. Anna Halpern remains a huge influence on everything I do, and it's how studying her work and then getting out to California and meeting her was how I eventually met Jamie.
hmm.
Um, and everything that you're bringing here today is resonating with the direction I'm finally moving in after years of feeling like I need to get my hands in the dirt. I need to and I'm also starting to move this initiative that I run. Like right now, our focus is water, but I feel that food and urban gardens, which are I live in Baltimore, Maryland. And So it's kind of like what's next, and I just really appreciate the seeds that are being planted here. I wanted to ask you if either of you know about the Water is Love film or the sort of movement that's arisen around it. If it was My work focuses on climate, environmental justice, et cetera, and it was eye-opening for me to understand that there truly is a kind of neglect of the question of the water cycle in the conversation about climate change. And just thinking about urban environments here in Baltimore and thinking about heat and like adaptation, but their position is, and the folks who are doing all this parallel work around water retention systems and so on. And they talk so much about how it is like so much water is stored in the plants, right? That the plants are not just a carbon sink, they're also holding the water, right? And the roots are holding um, what makes the holding of the water possible and, all of those kinds of things. And yeah, so I'm just curious if it was just going to say like this idea that building out marshland and like all of the things around the water system are not only are they really important, but they are things that people can do on a small scale in communities that can kind of build out larger and larger, um, which got me really excited in thinking about, oh, there's ways that we can think about what we're already doing and maybe some new things that we need to do that aren't quite individual, but they're not about directly taking on corporate power, which also, of course, needs to happen. They're about like we can do work that directly cools the immediate environment we're in.
Hmm. Sure.
So I'm just wondering, Rachel, if you have any responses to that film or thoughts about this. You did mention some people working with water.
Yeah, I think that comes from Tamara, yeah, the
Yes.
community. Yeah, I haven't seen the film, but it has crossed my viewfinder, and I'm familiar with the work that they do on that land to really catch and store the water. And yeah, it's surprising that there's not more conversation about water since it is essential and it's scarce. And that's another place where there's serious precarity for a lot of people. So I'm not, yeah, I mean, I think any projects that tend to healing the waters, relating to water sufficiency are great ways to spend our time for sure.
Hmm.
For sure. I think it's wetter where you live than where I live, right? Pretty
Yeah,
wet.
I mean, we're in it. We just have been starting to get messages about low water in the reservoir, voluntary water restriction.
Hmm.
We do have drought in the summertime. The heat here is really bad, so that tends to evaporate a lot, and we've had low rain the past couple of years.
Yeah,
So
so there,
that's not California by any means. It's
oh,
yeah,
yeah. But like
but
catching, people can catch water. Like I always think every house should have a cistern. That's what it used to be, right? When there wasn't a municipal water system, people would catch and gather and husband, to use a weird word, their water source. Yeah, it seems useful to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't familiar, Tamara is a community in Portugal, and there's so much great work happening in Europe. I want to make sure to acknowledge our global community because sometimes we can become very U.S. centric in speaking of these issues, and just want to acknowledge everything that's happening in Europe around regenerative land movements and water. Yeah.
And they're in Portugal, which is also subject to the kind of droughts that California is. And yeah, and Tamara has just a big framework on the work that
Mm-hmm.
they do. Like one of their big ideas is taking the war out of love. And so they're really like tending to like how the individual body and the collective body contributes to or can shift the dominant paradigm, and beautiful work.
And also in terms of Baltimore and any urban center, of course, as we know, the more trees that are planted create shade, create cooling in the city. So that was something that really inspired me about Basil Camus' work about getting all these saplings and handing them out for free, and encouraging communities to plant trees everywhere. Because as we know, trees kind of hold, like you were saying, they hold the water, they use the water. Are beings of water in form. So really important to support the planting of trees in your environment. Other responses? For some reason, every time I gesture, my hand, my hand signal goes up.
Well, I would like to respond to exactly what you said, Jamie. And thank you so much for this conversation, because I've been in the permaculture conversation for a really long time because my father brought permaculture to Europe, basically, Declan. And he is now living in a community called Lebensgarten Steierberg, which is in Lower Saxony in Germany. And there's a permaculture park, they call it. It's 4 hectares. And we are doing Global Water Dances initiative. I say the steering committee I was on, but I'm not on anymore at the moment. But I'm doing Global Water Dances actually on the permaculture plot. And we are there to really do exactly those things that you were talking about, is to bring people really into the presence of the whole idea. And this year, last year I was working a lot on that theme that you were just talking about, is the whole idea of planting trees and how we do that. And this year I'm really working on the whole idea of using the 12 permaculture principles of David Hall Green, and really working how can we use those and dance through the actual permaculture plot while we are using those principles also in dance and movement. So there's a real kind of bringing the two things together. And anybody who wants to come is very much invited. Or if you know anybody around there, I'd really love to have lots of dancers, because we do want to have it kind of in the sense of a movement choir, that kind of a community sense. And lots of people from the community will be there, and it'll be an opportunity to mesh also with the community there. So it's really bringing things together. I don't live in the community, I live in Berlin, but I know the community very well. And so we've kind of put these different pieces together. And I really love the idea that the permaculture and the ecosomatics come together. I've been working with this idea since the 80s, because I also was at Anna Halprin's, and I was taking it further and saying, okay, how can we do it in the natural environment as one, but also just in a park or somewhere in Berlin, in the 80s in Tanzfabrik. And so I've been working a lot with that. So I love this whole conversation, and thank you so much for doing this, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And could you please put in the chat the link for Global Water Dances so people will know about that project?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Someone already
Appreciate
did. Someone already put it there.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, great. Beautiful.
Thank you.
I have some thoughts, but I've seen Garrett's hand up for a long time. So if there's time, I'll go after Garrett.
Thanks, Carol. I'll be brief.
No,
Thank
no,
you
no.
both for
Yeah.
holding this conversation. I'm a Tamaulipas Level 2 student, under Daria's tutelage, and working towards a Level 3 project. And I'm just curious if either of you, Jamie or Rich, have advice on building community through ecosomatic action, how to meet people where they're at. Um, the whole rewilding, regenerative movement, it's very rich for me, but for my local community, it feels like, people are just trying to get start and think about how their bodies relate to the larger body. And so if you have any experience with bridging that gap for people through the work.
You're cutting in and out.
You-
Hmm.
I think we lost you, Garrett.
Yeah.
I think you're back.
Sorry, is that better?
Oh,
Yeah,
you're
we
back.
lost you in the middle of your question.
Okay, just curious if you have any advice for, how to meet people where they're at in building community through ecosomatic action.
That's a big question. Yeah, I hear you saying it's a project you want to do for your level three, and so I think there's many people you could call on in this who are here today who you could call on for consultations with that. But it's you know what I mean. It's not like a 3 minute answer or Rachel. Anything you want to?
Yeah, I guess I just get curious, like what group of people are you aiming towards? And I think you got cut out speaking about people are just something something. It was hard to understand. There was some qualifier in there that I missed.
Yeah, I think people here, it's very, kind of a blue collar community that's transit, there's blue collar and then there's like information technology
Yeah.
hubs, and there's like no bridge. Um, and what I'm experiencing is people don't know what somatics is. They
Yeah.
don't know what rewilding or regenerative or permaculture is.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's like, just getting people in touch with their bodies is a great first step. Um, but I'm just curious if there's ways of kind of putting it out there in layman's terms, or is it holding community gardening initiatives? Is it, have you tried anything that has failed miserably or worked very successfully that you might just, you know or even just initiatives that have worked? It looks like Water is Love is a great one, um, and the Water Dance Project. Um,
But
but
those
yeah,
don't sound
anything.
those don't exactly sound like the kind of community you're working with. Those sound like communities that are already bought into it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Correct. Yeah.
I don't think there's not a one answer to what you're saying, but I think part of the process would be like really observing what are the conditions on the ground for people? What are people needing and wanting? You can't just go into a community and say, here, you need this. That never works. So it's more like, how do you feel in? How do you make relationships? Is there a nature walk you can go on together or some kind, like I would start really small, but be really like, do try to sort out like what are people up to? Where would be the places where you could offer some of what you have?
Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Carol, I'm ready.
Are you supposed to end in 2 minutes?
No.
No. Okay. Um, so thank you both. I am just really been appreciating deeply. I've known you both for what, 40 years or so, and I feel like both of you have tied in uh, all of the connectors from the somatic body, the internal process, to the expressive body externally, to community, to land. And I feel that I'm just knowing that you've been walking the talk, both of you, for so long and teaching others to do that as you've been learning. I'm just sitting with so much appreciation of how you've articulated and facilitated today, as well as watching you facilitate, both of you, for so long. And I think for myself, it was very interesting because I think you both know this and other people don't, but I actually grew up in political community that was connecting all those dots with biodynamics and permaculture gardening uh, since I came out of my parents' my mother's womb. And so 20 years in community and political community and gardening and permaculture, and then went to a biodynamic farm in Vermont for 4 years and making our own cheese from the cows we milked, and then killing the cows and the chickens and the pigs and the sheep for meat, and growing the food that they ate, being 75% self-sufficient. Then fast forward into urban life where dancing became and somatics became my life, was such a huge in a way, it was an expansion, but it was also a contraction. It was both at the same time. And I think my only comment that I wanted to make was that I just planted. Um, I've been really sick for 2.5 years, so I haven't had any physical energy, but I just planted 10 seedling beets and uh, and one plant of cucumbers and one plant of squash. And I was feeling this was hilarious because of where I'd come from in terms of acres and acres of gardening and baling hay and 500 acres of farm, to feeling like what am I doing? And I can just go to the store and buy 50 beets in a minute, as opposed to watching each of these little 10 beets grow and one single plant. So I was thinking about what you're saying, Rachel, in relationship to what it is. It's like, what does that give me? Just those 10 beats. And what can I do given my limited energy, given um, where I am right now and who we each are. So I was just appreciating again, both of you emphasizing uh, there's something everywhere. And what is it, as you said, Jamie, what calls you? Because we can't do it all. And yet, if we are practicing the personal to the political to the world, it has to intersect and interconnect. So I'm just uh, was noticing my own feelings about where I've come from and where I've ended up in my 10 little beats in the ground, and um, what you were saying and where we all have to figure out our little place with where we are in the moment, with what's going on in the world in the moment. So thank you. Mostly all that to say thank you and a little bit of where I've come from.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of beautiful. It's an expression of your resilience and your still commitment to the life force that's in you and around you. 10 little beats.
My little beats, yes.
It's not about like whether or not you can get it at the supermarket, really. It's really functioning on a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to add, I've talked a lot, but I just add, it's so clear to me that particularly in our urban areas, but also in our rural areas, that the disconnect, I mean, the reason we are, the school I went to was saying, you have to get up at 5, milk the cows, because then there wouldn't be any cheese. You couldn't make butter. You couldn't, so that connection between what we were physically generating and creating, it's never going to leave me. It's never going to leave my body because I understand where all that food come from. And I'm okay eating meat and organic meat because I killed it. And it's okay that I killed it because I learned how to do that. So those connectors are what most people really are not getting. I mean, there's more and more people doing it. The movements are huge, as you said. A couple of people said, and Jamie, you've said, all over the world. And my work, when I was teaching in Colombia and the Global South, the amount of permaculture and local farming is just enormous, even in the Global South as well as Europe. So sorry for taking up so much time.
I'd like to take a moment for a poem I discovered today, courtesy of Rebecca Solnit, who's one of our great, wonderful writers. And it's a poem by a woman I'd never heard of before. Now I'm very curious. Her name is Cole Arthur Riley, from a book called Black Liturgies. Hope is a risk, especially when you've known what it is to dream for better and only be met with the tyranny of degradation, greed, and violent appetites. But despair is a concession. Be careful of who you let regulate your dreaming. Always remember who benefits from our hopelessness. And because poems are best sometimes digested a second time, hope is a risk, especially when you've known what it is to dream for better and only be met with the tyranny of degradation, greed, and violent appetites. But despair is a concession. Be careful of who you let regulate your dreaming. Always remember who benefits from our hopelessness. And so I want to bring that today to the conversation because, of course, so much of what we're facing let's face it, it can be a real downer, right? I mean, it's just like sapping of energy. But to remember that despair, giving in to despair, is a concession, is a kind of submitting, being obedient. And how do we find our own fire and fervor to remember how important it is to hope, not, kind of ungrounded or what we call hopium, but hope that is driving the heart to come forward, to continue not only the struggle, but just the beauty of the reward of what we've created. Anybody else before we close today?
I might just offer a thank you to Jamie and Rachel. And also, I'm just feeling the thank you to Ismeta that this has been happening and that Jamie, you've been facilitating. I don't know if this is the 20th one, whatever number, but
It's the 10th.
okay. Yeah. So the 10th one. So I was very moved today with this feeling. This is kind of creating an archive or a library also of these conversations and highlighting the importance of this topic. So just appreciating you and Ismeta and everyone who cares enough or was able to show up today. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
If I may add from the side of Ismeta, also Jamie, thank you so much for keeping up your initiative, for all of you joining. Also Rachel as a guest today, bringing in so much of your own experience, expertise, and being so transparent. anyone who does not know ISMETA, like this has been an ISMETA conversation that Jamie, as I said, initiated. We are the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapist Association. I will just in a second post our newsletter link because we have many more beautiful topics and also keeping up to date about the future calls of this conversation line. And for anyone who is free to join us in September for our conference in Spain, uh, Ecosomatics are a huge part of all the happenings. And there is so many beautiful contributions about the elements, the connection to yourself, to the world, to others, and especially to nature through your body. We are super excited where all this is going. And Jamie, Rachel, thank you so much, and everyone who joined today and contributed.
Thank you, Florian. And I just wanted, for those of you who want to kind of save the resources, if you go to the very top of the chat, ISMETA Community Meeting, there's 3 dots. You click on those and then you can save the chat. So there's a lot of resources in the chat to check out. And otherwise, thank you for bringing your attention to the conversation and showing up. And thank you, Rachel. It's been delicious to connect after quite a while, a bunch of years. And so we keep flowing in and out of each other's lives and continuing to do the good work that we're all doing. So thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was good to be here.
All right. Bye-bye.
Beautiful weekend to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Get into nature.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.